Hi there, my name's Susan Lane and I practice naturopathic iridology and I also practice nutritional healing. My background's podiatry and I got into naturopathic iridology because I was so interested in the cells around the pupil. These cells around the pupil are 100% diagnostic in the medical field in a lot of countries in the world. So I'm going to start off by showing you the piece of equipment that I use. Now this piece of equipment actually magnifies the eyes up to 80 times and the iris and all the fibres, and there are very few of these in the UK, and this is made in Australia by Iris Supplies. And then I get people to rest their chin on here, have the forehead against here. I look in through the microscope here and then I take a photograph, and then I'm able to show the person that I'm with the images of their enlarged or magnified irises. So the next thing is I'm going to show you some charts that I use. There's 5 different maps within iridology, or roundabout there. So the first thing that I look at is the cells round about the pupil, and we can see this chart here. The chart here is what I look at, and depending on the number and the space that it looks a little bit different, then I start to use this chart and the information. The next thing I look at is the shape of the pupil, and then, so that's map 2, and then I look at another map which is just round about the pupil, and then another map beyond the collarette, which is round about here, and then we look at the sclera as well, the whites of the eyes. So these are just some of the maps that I use, and here is something else that I like to use, and it's an iridology chart, and I also work with the large and small intestines. And here's another chart that I work with, it's like reflex points in the colon. And this is another chart which is for the sclera. There's a right and there's a left, and that's for the whites of the eyes. And then here I work with the Chinese tongue diagnostic. This is a really brief chart. So the next thing is I'm going to show you some fantastic images on the computer here. So just go. So yeah, I was talking about the cells around the pupil, and this is the first thing that I tend to look at. And if we can zoom in, we can actually see here that it looks like a loop, and it's called a buttonhole. And this buttonhole inner pupil border sign signifies that this person is unable to metabolize uric acid, and it's a tendency. That's a word I like to use, is tendency. And so this person in the family, there's most probably been things like gout and arthritis, which most people know about. And then there might be respiratory problems, cardiac problems, and certainly bowel problems, bowel imbalances. Okay, so we'll just move on to, and here we have, these are called cat's claws, and you can see that they're pointing outwards, and the cat's claws can be pointing inwards and they can be pointing outwards as well. So when they're pointing out the way, this means that there's a tendency to hormonal imbalances, like, for example, progesterone. And generally, cat's claws signs can mean a tendency to serotonin imbalances, and also, if they're in the way, it can be issues around suppressed anger, and that can affect things like the chest. It can affect lung complications. Not affect lung complications, it can cause lung problems and bowel problems with the unresolved anger. So I'm going to look at another one. This one here is where we have the inner pupil border. We can see it's quite thickened, and this usually indicates that there is a tendency to the immune system being hyper active, and we can have all sorts of things like autoimmune disease and so on, and allergies and so on. And here, if we come in really closely, we can actually see that the inner pupil borders are slightly grey, almost like white, and this indicates tendency to osteoporosis. And here's a really another important sign. This is a globular sign, and we can see it's roundish and it's like a blob. And when it's at 360 degrees, this usually indicates that there's hypothalamic imbalances which will affect the intestine. All sorts of things related to this. Certainly quite a big sign for dysbiosis, which is a bacterial imbalance of the small intestine and also the large intestine. And there might be associated symptoms like depression, which you could understand, and also gastritis and so on. And some more. The next thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the pupil flattening. And the pupil flattening is where there's flattening in certain areas of the pupil. Here we can see this flattening here and here. And the pupil circumference represents the spine and all the nerves coming out of the spine, and then the nerves supplying the organs. And here we can see left and right some flattening. And the smaller the flattening, the more significant or more important the area of the spine where we are looking at is more significant. And here we can see more flattening. And for example, here we can see that this flattening, this is a right eye, and this area usually signifies pancreatic and liver tendencies, imbalances there. So blood sugar problems. And again, we can see flattening here. And this time, we're going to look at the pupillary lumen, and we can see this sign looks quite cosmic, if you like, but it looks like small stars. This indicates that this person has fermentation going on in their gut. And I find this really exciting when I see pupillary lumen signs. And this can disappear once you get the balance, the gut rebalanced, and there's no fermentation going on. This actually disappears, this sign. So it's very diagnostic. And here we can see some more signs, but they all mean different things. And again, here we've got another one. And here we can see that there's two signs going on here. It's almost like looking into space. The next thing we're going to look at is collarette signs. So the collarette is this bit that's usually zigzaggy, but not always. Quite often zigzaggy. Here we can see the collarette, which is white almost, and it's a square shape. And the square shape means that there's a tendency, and certainly has been in the family, diabetes. Again, if we can see the collarette sign again. And the orange pigment attached usually indicates the pancreas, involvement of the pancreas. And here the adrenals, and we also have a pigment attached to adrenal sign, so definitely blood sugar issues going on here. And with the zigzagging at the top, we see that there's a tendency to depression, anxiety, and so on. So definitely about rebalancing those blood sugar problems. And then here we can see the collarette, looks like you can get your finger underneath it. This is called a bridge. So it looks like you can get your finger underneath there. And when we have the bridge sign, this means that the person must look after their liver. Everybody should look after the liver, but in some case, and again, we can see that we can get, looks like we can get our finger underneath this part. It's very common to see this sign in the brown eye, the hematogenic eye, So again, if the person doesn't look after the liver, there will certainly be problems, as with most people, but hormonal tendencies, again, progesterone imbalances. And here we can see a sign. This is a hole called a crypt in the iris fibres, but it's got a red blood vessel passing through it, and this person had colitis. And that red blood vessel can actually disappear. And again, more signs, again, more collarette signs. The next thing is we're going to look at these holes in the iris. So these holes, these are called pancreatic. These are called leaf lacuna because they look like leaves. If we can see, they look like they've got the veins of the leaf going through. And they tend to be attached around the collarette, the zigzaggy bit, but they can also be within inside as well. And here we can see a gigantic lacuna. This indicates that there has been diabetes in the family, and because there's a pigment attached to it, it's more significant, and there's usually great difficulty digesting carbohydrates with this person. And again, we look at the whites of the eyes, telling more things. Again, we can see crypts. This is in the adrenal area, usually signifying tendencies to allergies, fatigue, and maybe autoimmune problems. Again, more of these leaf lacuna, usually signifying hormonal imbalances, depending where they're found. And this is what we call a rooftop collarette, usually indicating bowel problems. Also, depending where it's found, hypothalamic changes, tendencies. And again, these is vascularized. I don't know if we can see this, but this is a vascularized blood vessel, and it's in the liver area. This is a very important sign, usually signifying that this person really needs to detox their liver. It can lead to serious complications. Again, thyroid. This is signifying thyroid problems within the family, history of thyroid problems in the family. Pigment attached, more significant. And then we can see a cholesterol ring, which is very common in the brown eye. And again, another thyroid lacuna. And this is a prostate sign here. It's in a man who had prostate cancer, and he had a very poor diet, very high in red meat and very high in sugar, refined sugars. And then here we have a uterine sign. So I actually sent this person off for scans to look at the possibility of uterine fibroids. And again, the whites of the eyes. So there's lots we can see when we look at the eyes. I'm just giving you a brief insight into the things that we can actually see. And on that note, we can even see there's histamine signs and so on. And on that note, I'd like to sort of come to an end here. And if you'd like to know more about this subject, just please go on to my Facebook page, which is Susan Ling, and it says Iridologi for Health. If you'd like to book an appointment, just go on to my website, iridologiforhealth.co.uk, and hopefully you enjoyed this little introduction to one of the most fantastic health subjects, and I love it. Look forward to seeing you.